I'm Amanda Knox, and you're listening to Hard Knocks.
Today on Hard Knocks, I interview Youngmi Mayer. She is a comedian, the podcaster behind Hairy Butthole, much to her agent's chagrin, and the author of I'm Laughing Because I'm Crying, a memoir about race, identity, motherhood, divorce, trauma, and the darkly funny parts about being human. Youngmi and I talk a lot about how comedy is a survival tool during hardship, about how healing is messier and funnier than self-help books would have you understand, and how we use humor to challenge stereotypes, power structures, and injustice. So just an all-around great conversation about comedy, humor, and how these things are tools for strength. Hope you enjoy.
Youngmi, thank you for coming on Hard Knocks. I'm really excited to have you on because I love a comedian. I love a comedian who talks about the hard stuff. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited. I love talking about the hard stuff.
Yeah. Why do you like talking about the hard stuff?
Well, there's I think that it's been kind of a long-standing thing that everyone knows that, comedy comes from this place of trauma. And I think a lot of comedians talk about that. And, there's so many theories and people have all these ideas. But I remember reading these comedy books when I first started stand-up. And, apparently biologically, laughter was our response to soothe our brains during traumatic times. So it makes sense that, a lot of comedians sort of dive into those parts of our lives to mine for material. But I guess specific to me as a comedian, it is a really big part of the Korean culture, and I'm Korean. So I think even though that is a commonality among comedians, that, the sad stuff is where all the funny stuff comes, I think I have a specific angle where I do a Korean version, a culturally Korean version of that.
Cool. So what is a culturally Korean comedian like?
Well, okay, so I have a podcast as well called Hairy Butthole, and people are always like, why did you call it that? That's so inappropriate. And yeah, people hate it. They're like, all the agents and stuff are, please don't mention the name of your podcast. But in Korea, the title of the podcast comes from this phrase in Korea that's a very popular phrase. And it's like, if you laugh while crying, hair grows out of your butthole. And so that's why it's called Hairy Butthole. It's like, and
is that a good thing? Do you want hair to be growing out of your butthole? Do you want to be laughing while you're crying, or no?
No, they don't. Yeah. It would be funny if Koreans were like, that was a Korean beauty standard. Like, do you want the most beautiful butthole in the world? It must be hairy. No, but in Korea, they would say it to children basically to make us laugh. If we, if we were in a situation where we were laughing and crying, trying to make us feel better. But yeah, I've noticed that it's a big thing that my family does, during sad moments, they crack jokes. So,
yeah, who is a model for you about cracking jokes during sad things? Did you have any models growing up for this?
Outside of my family,
or even in your family?
Well, I guess so here's the thing that's also what I've learned recently, because, I had a memoir come out about the fact that my family is like this. I guess it isn't Korean specific, but my Korean family is from this really rural area of Korea. So I'm maybe this is more like a farm country Korean thing. Because a lot of my friends are like, I've never seen my Korean parents laugh even once in my life. So I don't know what you're talking about. But yeah, I guess my model would be, my entire family. They're always cracking jokes. I've never seen them not joking, even at a funeral. They'll be cracking jokes. And I think the person that's the the worst at that is probably my mom. So I would say my mom is my model.
Cool. Yeah. So you brought up your memoir, I'm Laughing Because I'm Crying. And in it, you talk about a lot of trauma, a lot. A lot of just hardships and difficulties that you have encountered in your life, but also that you've had to like think about just in the history of your family's life. And you do it again in a laughing and crying way. Why? And I say that because I too am somebody who has a lot of like trauma in the history of my life, and I find it to be incredibly helpful to think about the absurdity of it and to really lean into it and to laugh about it. But I often am accused of being inappropriate, and so I wonder like how you think about that and what you get out of the process of laughing while crying.
Yeah, like I feel similarly. I've been accused of being inappropriate. But I think well, the funny thing is, like, you know, a lot of people when they read the book, they'll say that to me. They'll be like, "Oh, it's so like traumatic, and there's so many like traumatizing things in it." And I was like, "Really? I thought it was funny. I thought it was a funny comedy book." Um, and obviously, you know, like you stated, like it is about a lot of these sad things that happen, but I write them like they're funny stories. And that was like how I was taught these stories as a kid by my mom. Like she would tell me these horrible things that happened to my family. Like obviously Korea had like a very difficult period of political unrest in the last 100 years. And my mom told me these stories like they were funny stories. And then I always laughed when hearing them. And then when I went back to record her, you know, for research for the book, I was like listening, I was like writing it down and I was like, wait, this isn't a funny story. This is straight up like war trauma. Like, and I was just like, why did I think this was funny? And I guess that was my realization that throughout my life, I had been told that these stories were funny stories because that's just how my family shares like these traumatic events. And so without even knowing, I have always kind of done that. And you know, like some of this, obviously a lot of the really bad stuff that happened, I would say that probably it happened to my family, right? More than whatever happened to me, which is classic immigrant kid story. Like I can't complain about my life because my grandma had it so much worse. You know, her feet fell off in the snow or whatever.
Yeah. She lived off crab apples, you know?
Seriously, yeah. We had one apple and we split it among the 8 kids. And it was just like...
yeah, my grandma's like that too.
But, what was I going to say about that? But I guess like the reason that that's important to me is like, okay, so I learned this way of communicating my trauma from these people that went through something that was like horrifying, and they told it to me while laughing. So it's like, you know, when people have been like accusing me of like being inappropriate, I'm like, no, like this was like a survival tactic that was handed down to me, and it's actually I deeply respect it. I respect the fact that my family went through something so much worse, you know, and they could say it to me like it was funny. So I'm very like adamant against this idea that, you know, the way that somebody's, dealing with their trauma could be perceived by somebody else as inappropriate. You know, it just seems like very wrong to say that to anybody, you know?
Yeah, no, 100% I agree. I was just thinking about how, you know, I haven't really thought about this in terms of my own life, but so I'm not an immigrant, but my mom is. My mom was born in Germany. Again, super similar to you, where like American dad, German mom in this case, and you know, my oma has stories from the time, and of course, like their stories from being on the wrong side of history, which makes it even more interesting. But like, I think what's interesting to me is how little access I had to those stories, because I feel like there's like either two ways of telling a traumatic story and passing it on down the generations. Either you do it while laughing, you tell a traumatic story in a funny way, or you just don't tell it at all. And like nobody
Yeah.
talks about it and nobody hears about it. And that's my experience of like my family's, past during the Great War and all of that. And I have to like tease out from my Oma these stories that she's very, very reluctant to tell, maybe because she hasn't found like the humor in them all these years past. And so I think that it's really cool that your family had this baked in survival tactic. And I'm wondering, like, if you were to give advice to anyone who is going through a traumatic thing right now, how do you give advice about how to find the humor in it?
Well, even though I really respect that I was like taught this method of finding humor in something that's traumatic, like to process it, I have to say, like, you can't force it. If you're not, if you don't think it's funny what happened to you, that's also valid. Like,
Fair.
But I think in what you said, that's so important is I think what's really, really bad, and this is like a topic that I'm approached with a lot. I think the worst thing you can do is to not talk about it, right? And unfortunately, like you said, like I think a lot of us that have parents that are immigrants, that's the most common experience, right? And when I wrote the book, all my Korean American friends were like, how did you get your mom to talk about this? And I was like, I didn't. She's just a yapper. Like she thinks it's funny. But all of them are like, my parents will never tell me. And they feel this like sense of loss because even though their parents are trying to protect them from this trauma, what essentially they feel is like they don't know anything about their culture. So they're like, well, why can't you just tell me, why don't I speak Korean? And like, because like their parents are trying to shield them from all this stuff that happened. And I think that is the worst thing. So if I would give any advice on somebody that's like processing trauma, I think that I know this is like the hardest thing and it feels horrible, but I like just from living life at this point and seeing what it does when people hold stuff in and hide it, that is so bad. Like you have to talk about it. Maybe, it doesn't have to be on a podcast or a stand-up stage. You can talk about it with a therapist or your friend or something, but you have to like, I feel like you really do have to talk about it to process it. And you're not alone in it, because I feel like the strange thing about trauma is as horrible as it is, like just thinking about like the worst possible thing that I could imagine happening to me. I have a son. It's like, I think all parents think about, what if I lost a son or whatever. And I've seen, documentaries now where there are people who've experienced that. And it's like horrifying. But then they talk about like how amazing of a friendship they have with other people that have gone through that. And I'm like, wow, that's so powerful. Like you just went through the worst thing imaginable. But in sharing it, you have this amazing experience. And I think that is the answer, just finding community.
So would you say that like when you talk about your own, like especially in the writing of your book, but it is even in your own comedy, when you talk about your own sort of messiness of being a human, is that you reaching out to make a connection? Because that's something how I feel. So I recently wrote a memoir as well. And a lot of it was talking about what it was like for me to get out of prison and try to be a normal person in the world anymore, or like, and not really feeling like there was a way for me to do that, like wanting to go back to being the kid who was an anonymous college student who this bad thing hadn't happened to, but that didn't, that life didn't exist for me. And as a result of that, I sort of stumbled into my freedom and made a lot of mistakes along the way. And I was very important for me to share that kind of thing because I felt like, one, that is a very true thing about trauma, that you don't just like go through a traumatic experience and then you're like, okay, you make bad decisions and you're trying to like figure yourself out again after the rug has been pulled out from underneath you. But also it was an attempt to make a connection, this like hope that if I share the way that I'm vulnerable, maybe someone will recognize themselves in me and I won't feel so isolated. Do you feel the same way?
I feel exactly the same way. And it was, for me, that was like a surprise when I think I gained any kind of notoriety, and it soon sort of overtook whatever idea I had when I started being a comedian. I was like, oh, this is actually the thing that I want in my life. You know, this connection with people who feel the same thing. But I just want to note that I think your experience and story, and I think the reason people find you so fascinating is like, you do have this notoriety and this fame, but it was sort of like, wasn't on purpose, you know? And so I think, you know, one of the things that, obviously, I'm not like famous or visible. Like, I don't have visibility. I have like a TikTok following, which is very niche. It's not like being famous or recognizable, right? But I've even struggled with like the little bit of that I've gotten. And I think the hard part is like, there's this assumption that people think that that's good. Like, there's something about that they're like, oh, but don't you love that? Like, when people come up to you and recognize you. And I'm just like, no, there's like, there's something, it's like a byproduct that I didn't want that came with this other thing that I wanted to do, you know? But I think for your story, it's really interesting because, you know, you just, you didn't, you know, you weren't even attempting to do that. You were just kind of thrown into it. So obviously people in your case can see how it could be like a huge negative, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
What like, was it that brought you to the stand-up stage the first time? Like, was there like a flyer and you were like, I'm taking that flyer?
Yeah, I wanted to be a comedian my whole life. And I think what I was looking, without really like understanding, was like that feeling, you know, when you're like telling jokes and you're like having drinks with your friends and you're just laughing really hard and making other people laugh. Like it brought me like joy, and it felt like, you know, the closest thing that I could recognize as like meaning, you know. And in a weird way, essentially, I'm talking about this connection, you know, like a deep, profound connection where you're sharing this emotional bond with people. And like, what better connection is there but laughter? So I think that's what brought me to it.
Yeah. Do you find that you have to push yourself in uncomfortable spaces in order to get the laugh?
No, I don't think so this is where I think it was like this realization that I had that, you know, for a lot of people, the realization I had was that for a lot of people, it's very hard to talk about traumatic things. And because I've never had that impulse, because I think, you know, I was raised by my mother and like, we're just not like that. It's like, I have the opposite impulse where something that maybe seems like shameful to other people, I'm just like, oh my God, you won't believe this. And I have this impulse to share it. And like, kind of like what you just said about the beauty of that is like, once you do share it, you see that other people going through what you're going through or like feeling the way you feel, find community and, you know, they relate to you. And so then I guess like for me, I was just like, well, this is easy for me to talk about, right? This is enjoyable and I'm okay talking about it. There's a bunch of people out there that can't talk about it, but want to, or want to process it, but feel ashamed by it. And, you know, when I get messages from people being like, thank God you talked about this, because like I thought I was the only person, you know, that was going through this, and it made me feel, you know, like connected or something. I was like, oh, okay, so that I feel like that's giving my work value, you know. Yeah, but I never feel uncomfortable. It's weird. Maybe I should. Should I feel like embarrassed? I don't know. People ask me that all the time.
I think that no, because I don't think you should. And this is something that I feel I'm always trying to thread this needle too, where it's like you want to honor the experience. And I think some people feel like if you're making a joke, you're necessarily dishonoring the experience, but I don't think that that's necessarily the case. I think there's a way to thread the needle where you can honor the person you are and make fun of yourself, or you can like, you can nod to the absurdity and the silliness of an experience while also not, undermining the horror of it all. And I think that it's just a matter of threading that needle. And I wonder, like, even just like learning from your mom and the way that she like tells a horror story in a funny way. Like, what is like the art of doing that?
So I'm gonna say for myself, I feel like the reason why nobody really sees my work, I think, as inappropriate, and is because I think, like hearing what you're saying, like the examples, sometimes I'm in a situation where somebody is saying something sad and they're joking about it in this way that they're like masking their sadness. And I think there's like kind of this, it's understandable, but it's like this, like it's almost like they're moving away from the sadness by joking about it, And I think the way that I am is I am fully sad about it, but I'm just still laughing. I'm literally crying and laughing at the same time, like I don't think there's like any part of my work where people think that I'm like not aware of how sad it is, because I have a one person show now, and based on the memoir, and I'm in character as my grandma, and I talk about this fucked up stuff that happened. Sorry, I don't know if I can cuss, but
you can. It's a podcast. It's the Wild West.
So I talk about all the fucked up stuff that happened to my grandma, and in that moment, like I wrote the play to sort of explain like how I got to where I am, like why I'm the person that I am today. Like it's because of these things that happened to people from my past. And in those moments, it's not like I'm making jokes, but I'm like crying. There's like horrible stories. And I think there's just I truly think that there's no real way to communicate emotion except just like fully feeling it. And then when you fully feel it, people are just like, oh, I can see that this is very sad for you, and it's also somehow funny for you. Like, it's just like a mixture of both, and both things just exist at the same time. And I think there's all these like, I'm really obsessed with all these like intuitive things that we know as human beings that are beyond the scope of language, right? Like when you see me saying something and I'm saying like, this is something my grandma went through, and I'm laughing about it, but you can see that it's not funny. It's not like, it's funny, but it's like, it's not me trying to dishonor it or make it cheap. It's like, I'm like feeling it, and I have to laugh about it at this point, And I think people do pick up on that. And I think it's related to the thing you were talking about, where a lot of people come from these families where their families won't talk about it. And in a lot of ways, what ends up happening is that in not talking about it, they don't allow their children to grieve what happened to them, right? It's like, we're going to pretend that didn't exist. And so we're not going to even have a cry about it. And that is like a really bad feeling, and it disconnects people, I think, from their parents.
Yeah, I definitely wish that I had had more stories. I know that like I started getting stories from my parents when I was in prison. Because of course, you know, when again, like this is my history is like my family just not telling me stories. So, you know, then it becomes the running joke between all of my family members that of all the people in my family who went to prison, of course, it's like the one kid who did nothing wrong ever. Whereas like my
Oh my
mom has
God.
stories about, you know, getting drunk and like waking up outside of an airport not knowing how she got there. You know,
Oh my God.
but I
Wow.
only hear this story now that I'm like actually in prison and they're finally like opening up to me about like all of the bad decisions that they made when they were a kid, when they were, you know,
Yeah.
20 years old. And like they're just flabbergasted that the one kid who never did anything stupid was the one who
Yeah.
ended up in prison. Like that's the joke. And that's a way of like twisting it where it's like, here's this really, really sad thing that this like kid who did nothing wrong is in prison and ha ha ha. Here's all these bad decisions that didn't land me in prison. What are we doing here? Like, how do we
Mm.
hold all of that together all at once? And that's the kind of thing that I'm trying to like figure out how to communicate with people is like how, you know, when you say you lean into the sadness of it, but you also find the joke in it, like how do you find that humor? Like, how do you find that humor edge to these sad things? And like, that's one of the examples that, you know, it's just like an ongoing running joke in the family. Like any stupid decision that anyone else makes, they're like, and you know who went to prison? That one, not me. You know, like so anyway.
Well, I mean, I feel like if I was your mom, that would be, oh my God, I'm such a fucking crier. If I was your mom, that would be heartbreaking for me, right? Sorry, I'm not, I gotta tone it down a little. Like that would be heartbreaking for me. Like if I saw you through the view of your mom and you're just like a good kid, you know, this like good kid, and she never did anything wrong. And just me thinking about my son like going to jail one day, like that would like break my heart, right?
Totally.
And so it's like this is what I mean. Like I'm sure that, you know, your mom starting that joke, it comes from that heartbreak. Like my really good kid, she's never done anything wrong, and she's in prison, like in this country far away, and like I can't talk to her. Like that would tear me up. And so it's just kind of like, I guess it's just kind of like this understanding of like where that comes from, right? Because I can totally understand why that impulse would show up in your mom. Like that's unbearable. Like for me to have to sit there in my living room thinking that my kid is in jail, that's unbearable. I can't hold that. And so then it becomes like this, like, isn't it funny that I got wasted and, you know, and like try to get on an air, you know, like, and I woke up without my panties on, you know, and it's just like, and then that's the only place left to go at that point for, you know, and so I guess it is like this natural instinct, but I'm at a loss to explain exactly why that happens in that moment. It feels unbearable, I think.
Who do you think is drawn to your comedy and why?
It's a question. That's a good question. I think it is a lot of people who feel this loss. I'm just saying this because, like, just reading the responses coming from the book, and then I did, you know, my podcast before that. It seems like it's a lot of people that maybe have similar backgrounds. They're not all Korean, but they are a lot of times people who have immigrant parents. You know, kind of like your story of like, and they're trying to look for something that somebody's not telling them. And so I think a lot of people who read my book and have been in contact, they're just kind of like, oh, like this makes so much sense. And a lot of people respond saying something like, oh, I really understand my mom now, like my Korean mom. And she says that kind of stuff too. And I can totally see where she's coming from. Also, I wanted to say about your mom's history is that my dad is German. My grandfather was German. and his brothers and sisters were Nazis. And so, so there's a part of my book where I talk about, okay, so I don't really know that side of the family at all. Like my dad's dad abandoned him when he was a teenager. And he's never seen him since, this was the 60s, 1960, right?
Yeah.
My dad's old. And so I don't know anything about that side of the family. So but there's a part of my book where I'm like, here I am openly talking about all this war trauma that my Korean family went through. But I can't sit here and pretend that I'm also not the descendant of literal Nazis, And that's weird as a biracial person because like half my family lived through, the Japanese occupation and the Korean War. And the other half were Nazis and Irish people, I guess, that were just not doing anything. They're just being neutral and being peace-loving people. So that's like a complicated thing. And I think a lot of people shy away from that because it's like they don't want to be like associated with that. But that I feel like is I felt like for me personally, if I didn't mention that in my book, that would be very cowardly, Yeah.
Yeah, you're inspiring in me like some just like to think about some thoughts because it is funny. Like, I mean, it's tragic, but also funny to, look through old photos that you stumble upon in like your grandma's, dresser drawer and holy shit, there's a Nazi uniform. Like, oh my God, like that's not a good look. And you're like,
it's funny,
all those Indiana Jones movies that I love. We're the bad guys.
Oh no! Yeah. See, yeah. I don't.
We're the ones who get our faces melted off. Right?
Oh no. Oh no. Yeah. I don't have that because, like, again, my dad doesn't really know that part of his family. But that would be so funny. Like, if I mean, is it funny like to see a Nazi uniform and then it's just like I guess the reason I also wanted to talk about that was because I'm sure there are so many people who feel very uncomfortable about their family's history in that regard. But I guess in my story, you see the backstory of my two grandparents and see where they are coming from. And then you realize that us as the descendants and children of these people really did not have a say. I'm like half from the victims and half from the bad guys. So it's like, what am I supposed to say about this? I don't know. It's confusing,
Totally. It's messy. Being a person is messy.
It's messy.
What's the scariest personal truth that you've ever shared in your comedy, and what was people's reaction to it?
I guess again, I have this thing where I like don't think about the repercussions of oversharing.
Oh, how
like
nice! How nice!
Yeah, I should think, but then I realized way too late that I talk about like doing a lot of drugs, in my 20s, which I don't do anymore, obviously. But
your
also
dog's looking at you, by the way. There was this like nice moment where you said, "I don't do them," by the way, and the dog just like looked at you.
She's so cute. She's so cute, though. She's so evil but cute. Look at her. Oh my God, adorable. But obviously I don't do drugs anymore. But I was just talking about it as part of just like. A lot of it's like about subverting Asian stereotypes. Asian people are very, they don't talk about stuff like that. That's really taboo in Asian cultures. So I was like, well, whatever. I know so many Asians that do drugs. Come on. And so I was like, I'm going to talk about this. And obviously, I don't do them anymore. But like, it later dawned on me that I was like, oh, as a parent, this is kind of dangerous information. Like people can definitely use this against me. And especially now, like when we're, not to be like hyperbolic, but like the government is like becoming very scary. And like people are being censored. Like the guy that like got caught at the airport for having a file folder in his phone of JD Vance memes. Like, and then he couldn't come into America like that. Like, you know what I mean? It's like we can't even really joke anymore. Like, and it kind of dawned on me later, like, oh, like people can use this information against me. But I mean, even with that thought, I guess that's the scariest thing that I've shared.
Do you ever worry that here, this is just something, again, like, because I'm pretty new to the stand-up world. I've been doing it for like a year now. And one thing that I wonder about is, and you can tell me because you all, you haven't been doing stand-up for like 20 years, but do you wonder about how your comedy will age?
I don't worry about it. But I'll say this. There's this weird, even though I'm like in disagreement with a lot of comedians and a lot of stuff that they say, I think famously the biggest cultural phenomenon that happened with stand-up in the last 10 years, I would say, is like Dave Chappelle doing this anti-trans stuff, which literally fueled this like anti-trans hysteria in the right wing. Like, I think people don't realize how much that had a hand in this hysteria. But there's like, I have respect for stand-up comedians, and there is a part of me that would almost defend him because the art form itself is about that, right? It's almost like that's what we're supposed to do. And yeah, I understand this whole, the person with the microphone is the most dangerous person because they're spreading the idea, but it's almost like discounting the fact that the people that are listening to that person without thinking isn't as dangerous, right? Like, we could say, yeah, we saw Dave Chappelle saying this thing. It fueled this entire movement. Now there's millions of these people that are just have gone off the deep end with this trans hysteria. Like, what? I don't even know what they're talking about. They're at this point, they're saying George W. Bush's mom was a trans woman, and I don't know what's going on. And we can like we can make a clear path from Dave Chappelle saying his special coming out to this happening now. But I'm like, but it just exonerates all these people that are millions of people that are like making it weird, And so it's like we have to like have like, I agree that yes, the person with the microphone is the most powerful, but it's like we have to have agency and be like, okay, all of you have lost it here, and we have to like own up to our personal belief systems. We can't just like have somebody tell us something and go for it. That being said, as the person with the microphone, I think something that I'm proud of in myself is that I've always made sure that all my jokes fit in my ethos. And I think that is something that people do not take time to figure out, that's when it gets dangerous, right? Because you start stand up and then you don't think about what your ethos is, and you care more about the laugh, which is, I guess, technically your job, right? But you have to make sure that what you're saying doesn't go against your belief system. And because I feel like that's just something I always like think about a lot and worry about a lot, I would be shocked to find something I said even, like 6 years ago, 7 years ago when I started that didn't align with what I think. I would be shocked, Like if I said something and I was like, what? Like, I know for a fact, obviously, I never said any like racist stuff because it never fit in my ethos.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. How do you think comedy can help people discover their ethos? Like, does the comedy come after the ethos, or do they sort of like co-inspire each other?
Like people who are listening to comedy or doing comedy?
Or just doing comedy?
I think there was a part of it that just after doing it for a while, and I kept hearing similar themes come up over and over again, that it did in fact help me figure out what my core beliefs were, or things that were very important. Like something would, like a kind of a theme would come up or would always anger me, and then it helped me understand myself. Yeah, so it was kind of like, yeah, like it was like in tandem. It was like there was a underlying baseline idea of who I thought I was, and then I like just through repetition, I could hear, oh, this is really important to me. It always comes up, and I always think this is funny because I think this is like enraging, you know? So yeah, it did help me figure out
Can
my
you give an
voice.
example of that?
One thing that well, this is kind of like related, you know, like it's like okay, like it's like, you know, yourself, you know, something about you, right? Like let's say I'll give a personal example. Like rich people just always annoy me, right? Rich people, and it's like very general in my head, like this abstract, something about them just fucking pisses me off. I don't know what it is. And then, you know, like after making jokes about them, basically I found out the core thing that bothers me isn't necessarily rich people. It's like the people that like, because my ideas of what, no, this is getting so abstract, but like I'll just try to say it very clearly. Like my ideas of like, okay, if you're gonna be wealthy, if you're gonna be successful, it's like for me that's tied to freedom, right? I think, you know, if you're like grew up poor, you're just like, oh, then I don't have to worry about like where my next meal is gonna come. And I think what ended up happening was like what bothered me about a lot of like rich people that I was around was that they, or I think there was like some sort of belief that we're all fed that to become like successful or wealthy, you're like extra special, right? You're like, there's something special about you, like you're smarter and you worked harder. Like we're all fed that, right? Capitalistic
Instead of you're just
lie.
lucky. Yeah.
Yeah. But then I think, so in my head, I was like, oh, this is somebody that's smarter and like better at something than me. And then obviously, you know, after meeting them, I was like, actually, no, your dad is just rich. And then I feel like I just got, it's basically like these general feelings that I had got more specific. And then I understood I don't hate rich people. I just don't like it that this person sucks at everything. And for some, they were just born rich and now they get to live happily and they're really bad at what they do. Like that's what bothers me. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
And it wasn't them being rich. It was just like you're really bad at your job and you're rich. Like, oh, like that. Yeah. So it just gets more specific, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And then that gets distilled into like, what about that specifically bothers me? And then I found out, I was like, injustice, like the sense of injustice. And so then once I discovered that about myself, it's like all the jokes that I write fall in that line. You know, does that make sense? So, yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel like that's so interesting that, you know, so I'm very in the place of like, well, shit just happens. Some people get lucky, some people get unlucky. And weirdly, I don't get mad about that per se. And I wonder, like, do you need to be like mad about something? Like, does something need to bother you in order for you to like make jokes about it? I'm just trying to think of like where you get your like the impulse to talk about a thing, right? Like, you know?
I wanted to say, so I shouldn't do this. Like, you know, like I feel like I have that thing where I just assume everyone feels the same way that I do. But I understand like what you're saying. Like some people just don't, they have a different emotional reaction to things that they disagree with. And I believe that, you know, things don't make other people as angry as they make me. But also I always wonder, when I hear people say stuff like that, I wonder how much of it is like this suppression or like disassociative.
Yes, probably.
Yeah. I wonder. I'm not saying it is, but I kind of wonder, like, maybe there are things that really make you angry or sad. And, you know, all our lives we're taught to like sort of hide that, right? Like that's not polite, and you know, especially like
It's not graceful to be angry. Yeah.
And I think I actually had this journey into like finding my anger. It was like a process. And so then once I feel like I tapped into it, I felt very happy showing it. But it's scary. It's like vulnerable showing anger or any emotion.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when I went back to Italy, I one of the things that I did was we stopped by, like we drove by the prison where I was at, and where I'd lost 4 years of my life. And I remember standing outside of it, and I'm just thinking about like how angry I got because of, like, I was struck by the amount of mental gymnastics that I had to put myself through just to just to survive those years, and to like try to like be okay and think, oh, I can make a life worth living here. Like, like I was facing a 26-year prison sentence. And so like the kinds of things that I had to convince myself of to be okay with that life that I had in front of me. I like, now that I'm outside of it and returning to that and just being really viscerally reminded of like how I had, like what sort of mindset I had to maintain in order to just get through a fucking day, like made me so angry, like on behalf of my younger self, that I was having to do. So in the same way that like you mentally train yourself to be okay with bad things just because you don't have a choice. Um, and now that I think about it, there's got to be a joke in there. I got to work, I got to work on something about like how fucked up, like the kind of stuff that I had to wake up and be like, skippity-doo-dah day. It's another day on the cell block. Like, don't worry about it. Everything's good. How you doing, Jenny? 26 years. We got this. Like that kind of vibe. There's something there. So yeah, no, I think you're right that like I don't believe in suppressing emotion, but I do think that our brains are remarkably good at being flexible.
Yeah, it
And like,
happens automatically.
yeah,
Yeah.
and sort of adapting to a new normal of like, here's the status quo, here's how this is the situation, so how am I going to nimbly adapt to it? And like that is valid, but the other side of it is also valid, which is, oh my god, I never should have had to do these mental gymnastics in the first place. Like how do you hold those two things at once?
That's a
Yeah.
really interesting thing to find yourself being angry about. It's like almost like, yeah, like, because it's kind of specific, It's like,
But it's like you're getting angry that you had to be zen, And being
mm-hmm.
zen is not a bad thing to be. Like being zen is great. It's a great way to go through life and to live life in a fulfilling way, but also fuck off. Like, Jesus Christ. I had to be
Yeah, I
so fucking
wonder.
zen, and that sucked.
What do you think would have happened if you weren't Zen? Like if you were just not
Oh, if I
Zen?
wasn't zen, I would have lost my fucking mind, is what would have happened. Like, people killed themselves around, people were like
Mm,
either drugging themselves into like a catatonic state, or they were, and by the way, legal drugs, like the drugs that the prison would give you to just put you in this like zombie catatonic state,
wow. Mm-hmm.
or you would just fucking kill yourself. Like that's all you can do. Or
Mm-hmm.
you get into some zen mental gymnastics stuff, and you figure out how to live your life day by day, and tell yourself it was worthwhile,
Mm.
and that's how you do it. And it's real. Like, you do find real ways to do it. You write a long, heartfelt letter to your mom. I did like 900 sit-ups in one day. You just like find things to do and reasons to be in this very, limited scenario.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like the anger is like for being made to be strong, you know? Like it's just like it just sounds like a complicated, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have no idea how I would feel. I feel like just knowing myself, because I'm so I mean, things like that, like what you went through, like the injustice, you know, when something's so unfair, that's like something that I really struggle with, you know. It's like as a concept. And I think going through something like that, yeah, I feel like I would have to go to a very special place to deal with that every day. And so, yeah, it sounds like it's like an interesting thing. But I don't know I don't know what jokes I would make in your shoes.
A lot of your jokes are pushing back against like stereotypes and power structures. And again, like that sort of comes back to the injustice of it all. But is part of it also like you want to give yourself and other people to like just be more complicated than that, than what society would have you be?
Yes, I definitely think that another thing that, and you know, like again, like this probably wasn't something I set out to do in the beginning, but it just became like, as everyone knows, you know, whoever you are, you're sort of placed in this box, like whatever Asian woman, you have to be like this, and we expect you to tell these jokes, you know, whatever people see, they want that, like what they expect, right? And it just becomes really limiting as like an artist or a creative when, you know, you only have to say these like especially in stand-up, which is a very formulaic art form. It's like it's just distilled like quick information, right? And you can't even be that nuanced because people have to like
set up punchline.
Yeah. Asian woman, we're gonna say Asian woman, like that kind of thing. And it became so like restricting that it wasn't like I set out to be like, I'm gonna make myself appear like a fully fleshed out human being. I just was like, I don't really have like the stereotypical story that you want me to say. I can't really make those jokes. So I have to sort of like just say this stuff and give myself more nuance. And I think people, you know, like the interesting thing is like the other aspect of comedy and part of the reason why people use like very extreme trauma or like very raunchy stuff is like people also react to being surprised by laughing, right? So surprise is a big element of comedy as well. And so I think by just being somebody that like got on stage and didn't say the things that people thought I was gonna say was like, oh, that's interesting, and like people found that kind of like interesting too. And weirdly enough, you know, like it became funny. But yeah, but the thing is, like I said, I never tried to do that. And I don't think I think people have to try to be the stereotypical version. And unfortunately, a lot of creative people, especially like people in like marginalized groups, you know, like Asian Americans, I'm just saying in this case specifically, they think because that's all they see, they have to do that. And it's like, they're trying to be that, you know? So for me, it was just like, I wasn't just like, basically my work came out from me just not trying to do that, just being myself, you know? And then all of a sudden it was like subversive. And I was like, oh, I'm just like talking about my actual life. That's like so weird. Yeah.
That's interesting. So it's not like something you set out to do. It's just how people are defining the thing that you're doing in the aftermath. Yeah, as if you're like intentionally trying to take down the system, and you're like, no, I'm just intentionally trying to be funny about my own life.
Yeah. And I was just like, no, yeah, I'm not setting out to do this, you know? Yeah. Yeah.
But now that you've been labeled that way, does that put a weird pressure on you?
No, because I feel like I've gotten, you know, like something I'm happy about in my creative life is that I think I started really late. I was like a stay-at-home mom until I was 33, which is, you know, part of my story. And I just because the reason that I got into doing stand-up was like, oh, I've always wanted to do this. And like, the reason was like, I want to be myself, right? And so from the beginning, I was just kind of like, the whole point is that I'm going to be myself. So I never, it didn't even occur to me to put on an act, right? So then, because of that, I weirdly like created a lot of freedom in my work, because like I just continue to like be myself. And if it was this like act, like if I was trying to specifically get famous like through like traditional stand-up, and I was like doing this sort of like whatever people want, then it would be very exhausting, I think, at this point, you know, to keep that up.
Yeah. How do you balance disclosure and privacy? Especially, you know, considering that you're a mom. Like, I think about that a lot as, like, I think part of your approach to comedy that's similar to mine is that, like, you're disclosing things that are other people would otherwise feel are like taboo, and so that sort of openness is itself sort of arresting and because of that funny. But like, how do you navigate, again, like disclosure versus protecting privacy?
Well, again, I feel like I lack the good sense that most people have to have a little like discernment, like, and
you're like, I do not.
Yeah, I don't. But the way that it's come up recently, I guess a quick way to explain it is by proxy, like of like how other people are being affected by my openness, right? Because I don't really feel that sense of protection for myself, which is probably something I need to talk about in therapy. But like, I don't have that protective sense for myself, but then I feel bad when, you know, when I think about my son, like, would he want people to know stuff like this about his mom? And like, you know, I did the Daily Show a few weeks ago, and he was in the audience, and it was like really cute because I was like, oh, this is really exciting for him. And he was like backstage with the person, and as I got off stage, I was like, oh my God, like, did you have fun? Was that exciting? And he was like, Mom, you did cocaine? And I was like, oh, I totally forgot that that's gonna bother you, because I was like joking about, you know, the part of my book where I did drugs in my early 20s. And then I was like, yeah, I totally forgot that that's scary. You know, it's scary for him. And I, like, at that point I was like, yeah, like, you know, when I was younger, like everybody does drugs. And like just being like, trying to be like, yeah, you know, I was joking about, but then it like deeply affected him. And obviously I don't want to hurt him, you know, and I don't want him to feel bad. And if we and like that's a really unique experience, because it's like, for most parents, I don't think most parents ever tell their kids that they did cocaine in their 20s, you know, even though I know a lot of them did. But like, do you know what I mean? Like, they might, when they're like, you hear about people being like, then I was having a beer with my dad, and, you know, I'm in my 30s, and he said out of nowhere that he did a bunch of cocaine in the 70s. And I didn't know that. Like, that's how people hear about their parents doing drugs. You know, they don't see them like seeing them on TV. So it just occurred to me that I think, number one, I guess to answer your question, I don't have like discernment. I don't like have a balance between the two. But I think now I'm realizing that I need to somehow deal with how that information is going to reach my son, you know, because obviously he hasn't read the book, but he probably will.
Yeah. I mean, it's the opposite situation. Like, it's the opposite problem, I feel like, from what we've experienced from our parents. And it's like those of us who didn't have yappy moms, who like didn't, you know, hear these stories, we're feeling disconnected from our parents because we don't have access to those stories. But then the other side is, oh, is the opposite of that also an issue where like your kid gets so much exposure to your stories that like you're so much of a flawed human being in their eyes that they like, but is that a bad thing? Like I feel really inclined to believe that like you should show your kids, you should expose your kids to your humanness so that they can more relate to you as they develop into a human being themselves.
I agree with you. I definitely agree with you. I just feel like he was a little too young. So I'm okay with him, like 16 to 18. I don't know when kids are mature enough to think these big thoughts. Like sometime in his late teens, early 20s, I think is the time that I would want. And to your point, that's like the kind of thing I want to teach my son. I want him to know, hey, like just because somebody does drugs or went to jail or like in your eyes, you see them as a criminal. Like that belief of like someone's a criminal and sort of they're dehumanized and they're horrible people and they're different than us and we're going to villainize them and those people are over here and we're over here. I hate that belief. And I would very much fight to make sure that my son didn't think that about people, like people who are like houseless. I would never want him to see somebody, on the street, like unfortunately we see a lot of people with that do, fentanyl, I guess, like looking very sad on the street. I would never want him to have this impulse like I'm better than that person. That person's a piece of shit and that person a piece of garbage. I that's the opposite of what I want him to know. So I'm more than happy to give him the message like, hey, your mom did drugs. That could have been me. It could have been you. It could have been any of us. We're just human beings and we all do stuff like that. And that's something I want him to know. But like, does he have to hear about that when he's 11? Probably not.
Yeah. He's probably not watching The Daily Show anyway when he's 11.
Yeah.
So yeah, he got like this weird behind the scenes access that he otherwise wouldn't have. But that's good to note for me in the future. My daughter's 4, and so she's slowly but surely becoming exposed to these kinds of things, and it's like, all right. When is the appropriate time for my daughter to hear me crack like sex jokes? Like not today. So, like that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people, there's so many people that have lines of work that are very adult. There's like, I have friends that are like in the porn industry and they have kids and blah, blah, blah. And like, obviously we all know that, like we are all on board with like a human is a human and there's no judgment and we don't look down on people, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, it's just like this, it's just a timing thing. You just gotta wait until they're 18, 20. Like they don't need to be knowing all that stuff.
Yeah.
Just yet. Yeah.
Right. In all its detail. So one last question before I let you go. Do you think that comedy has made you a stronger person? Like, where would you be today without comedy?
It's definitely made me a stronger person. Maybe it's too strong. I'm like, there's like a good thing about stand-up. Even though I don't really do that much stand-up, I do a one-person show now, and I'm focused on doing that. Sometimes I'll do stand-up, but it's pretty rare. What I noticed, there's this way that I'm strong now where just something about the practice has made me my brain is very nimble and knowing exactly what I need to say and what I want to say in that moment. And I can say it through any sort of emotional turmoil. And that is like the biggest strength. And like that is worth like, I went to open mics like 3 times a night for 2 years straight to like break through that like physical barrier of being uncomfortable on stage. And you just can't learn that unless you just it's like, playing tennis or so. You got to learn how to play tennis. Like it's a physical thing. Right. And I feel like learning that is such a gift because, I'm just able to quickly say what's on my mind. I'm able to communicate. And I can like, just like, there's so many situations, especially for women, like we get steamrolled all the time in professional environments because men talk down at us and treat us like we're dumb. And in those moments, they're not prepared for me to just be like, what? Like just coming into the ring and just like not being intimidated and like, like out talking them and out joking them. Like that is such a strength. Like I can't even begin. But like, did it make me stronger? Like in general as a person? Yeah, I think so. It also gave me confidence, I think all around. It's probably made me a lot more annoying, but it also did. I like how it's changed me. I like being, comfortable in my skin in this way. So yes, I think so.
Where can people follow you and hear about all your stuff?
So I'm online at YM Mayer, everywhere except for TikTok, which is Youngmi Mayer. And then I have a website, youngmimayer.com, where I post shows. I am touring the show a little bit. I have a residency at Joe's Pub in New York City throughout the fall. If you want to see my one-person show, it is based on the memoir. And then I'll put tour info up on my website. So
cool. All right. Well, thank you so much, Youngmi. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you. It was nice meeting you and talking to you.